Ladies and gentlemen, Moz-Art here. Is the replacement of your transmission fluid way overdue? Or you have never replaced it before? So check out this video so you have an impression of how to do it yourself at home. I've checked the owner's manual and it is recommended to replace the transmission fluid every 30,000 miles, approximately 50,000 kilometers. This car has 100,000 kilometers on it. I once already replaced the transmission fluid, but never replaced the transmission filter. So this will be a great opportunity to show you how to do it. These are the common tools that you are going to need. A jack stands for holding up the car up while you safely work underneath it. A light, an extension bar for greater leverage, and extra jacks for holding up the engine while you're removing the transmission. Wrenches, screwdrivers, a crowbar, sockets, ratchets, extensions, a collector pan. This item you need it also for refilling the transmission with transmission fluid, and of course the new transmission filter. First, jack up the car and safely secure it with a jack stand. Place the jack stand somewhere on the chassis. Do not play games with your safety. After placing the jack stands, give the car a good shake to see if it's not moving. Removal of the transmission fluid is pretty straightforward. Just remove this bolt. Here's your collector pan. And remove the transmission fluid. As you can see here, this is all the dirt that has been collected in the transmission. If you remove it, you can see the difference. Now let's place back the bolt. Do not forget also to use the washer. This is a protection for a preventage of leakage. And tight again the screw. No need to over tighten it, just make sure it is snug. This transmission fluid is a good indication of how your transmission is working. If it's a bit reddish, it's good. If it's like black, it's burnt. Check also if there are any particles in it. Let's proceed. We need to remove now the battery, the negative one first, and then the positive one, and remove the battery. The battery gauge is held in by 3 10mm screws. 1, 2, 3. This is the last one. I will leave the screws in there and remove the gauge or the box. There's also a connector down here. It's just easy to remove. Now we will remove the different connections, pipe connections. This is for the vacuum, and this is for the air, the intake air going to the turbo. This is for the vacuum. There are 5 connections. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. For the air intake to the turbo, it's just easy to remove. And that's it. It is necessary to remove all these components so we can reach down to the transmission. The next step will be to remove this box which holds in the computer for the regulation of the injectors and the air filter. It is also necessary because this box is connected to the intake to remove this intake. It's a 10mm socket. One, 2, I will place back this screw for in the future when I place everything back, not to forget about it or lose it. We'll replace or remove the connectors. This is for the mass airflow sensor, and these two are for the computer. Just put the cables for the connectors aside, and now we can remove the air intake box. The air intake box is held in by these rubbers. 1, 2, and the third one is broken. In order to create more room, it is necessary to remove all these electrical connectors and put them aside. In order to do that, we also will remove this fuse box and put it aside, and remove this connector. If we remove this connector, all the other connectors, we can put this on this side, so we can have enough room here to reach the transmission. In order to remove this connector, just push aside this black little thing. I don't know if you can see it. This where my screwdriver is pointing. Push it aside and remove this blue connector here, so you can remove this whole connector. I see there's also a ground of it. This one, a 10mm, remove it. Now I can push all the electrical connectors aside, so I can create more room to work on the transmission. And please just place back the fuse cover. The next step will be to remove the transmission mount. It is held in by two 12mm screws and four 15mm screws. Before removing this, it is necessary to remove this vacuum pump, which is held in by one 10mm bolt. This is the removal of the vacuum pump. I remove the screw, and now we will push this aside. Now we will remove the four 15mm screws. This is actually the bracket, and the actual mount itself is this one. In order to remove the transmission mount, it's necessary to remove this bolt. Before doing this, I will use the extra jack stand to hold the engine. I will place it underneath the engine as an extra support, so I can easily remove the transmission mount. I've placed the jack underneath the engine. The bolt is a 19mm socket. Every time you turn the bolt, the transmission will be lowered just a little bit. So it is important to bring up the engine just a bit more, so you can easily remove this bolt. I will place everything back that I removed, so we will not lose anything. The transmission mount bolt, the four nuts for the brackets, and the two screws also for the bracket. Okay, the next steps will be to remove this transmission mount bracket, these two sensors here for the transmissions, also 10mm. The bracket is 30mm, they are true screws. And for the safety, when I lower the transmission not to damage the computer, this one down here, I will remove that as well. Let's start. This is the bracket. Now we will remove these two sensors, one here and the other one here. Both of them are held in by 10mm screws. Now you can remove this whole sensor assembly. To prevent any dirt or debris falling into these holes, I will use some old gloves and seal them temporarily, so I'm sure nothing will fall into them. Alright, now let's proceed and remove this computer. In order to remove this computer, we need to remove this connector first. I will push down this clip here, and with a screwdriver, a flat one, you can push this aside. Alright, the connector is removed. In order to remove the computer itself, there are three 12mm bolts. One here, the second one here, and the third one over here. If you remove these bolts, the computer will be loose. And in order to remove this whole assembly together with this wiring here, it is necessary also to remove these two 10mm bolts, screws down here. And then in that case, I will be able to place this whole assembly aside. Let's proceed. A ratchet, an extension, and 12mm socket. The last step will be to remove this 30mm nut. For removing of this, you need both hands to remove it by doing a little bit of gymnastics, a lot of wiggling. And there you have it. Now it's by wiggling this computer to be possible to remove it. This is the connector of the computer, so be gentle when wiggling it to remove it, not to damage all these pins here or break them. Alright, now the next step will be to remove this hose here, which goes to the oil cooler for the transmission. When I remove it, I will show you how I have removed it. So yeah, in order to remove this hose, there are some connectors here, these blue ones. You need to press them in and then pull. It's very straightforward to remove this starter. The reason to remove the starter is because it's standing between the transmission and the engine. And also I need to reach the torque converter to remove the 6 screws which are connected to the backing plate. So let's get started. So if you want to remove these screws, I will be using a wrench and not a deep socket. If you are using a wrench, use the right hand method. So if you're using your right hand method, the screw needs to come out, so the thumb is moving into that direction. In order to move into that direction, the fingers needs to be turning this way. So if you turn this way, the screw will come out. So this is the right hand method. So the 2 screws has been removed. Now we need to do some wiggling in order to remove the starter motor. There it is.